Our Genesis passage this morning records a moment that has been pivotal to the emergence of three separate but related world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This is why we refer to them as Abrahamic faiths. They all trace their origin back to this one man, this one event, when the one true God called him out of a polytheistic culture and invited him to walk in faith into a new future. All that had come before, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah, all of that sets the stage for this moment of radical departure, radical trust, as Abram begins his journey. And for our three world religions here, this moment represents the historical emergence of monotheism for the first time in this Mesopotamian environment. Abram had already come from the land of Ur, which is said to have been located in what is now southern Iraq. And he had moved north. He had already been on quite the journey and had settled with his family in the city of Haran, which is a historic Mesopotamian city that still exists today in Turkey. And interestingly, I think this is very interesting, the primary deity that was worshipped in Haran at the time that Abram lived there was a moon god named Nanna in Sumerian. But he had a different name in Babylonian. Can anyone guess what the Babylonian name of the moon god Nanna was?
Yahweh.
Sin.
Wow.
Sin. Isn't that interesting? So there's something that's happening when we proclaim, even today, that through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God has freed us, released us from sin. We're evoking, without knowing it, this happens all the time in faith. We owe such debts to history. We don't even know that we're we're doing it. We're evoking this exact moment when Abraham was called away from the worship of false gods and brought instead into a new covenantal relationship with Yahweh. Now, of course, the word sin has come to refer to far more than simply a Mesopotamian moon god, but the origin and lineage of the term helps point us in the direction of understanding its proper meaning. At its root, sin is the worship of the false, the worship of false things, things that separate us from our relationship with the one true God, things that distort our relationship, things that make it such that we can't respond to God's calling the way Abram did. That's what sin is. It's the decision to worship, to continue to worship false and idolatrous gods. Sometimes even to worship ourselves, or to worship money, or to worship. You fill whatever you want in. But from now on, when you hear that word sin, I want you to think, have I been worshiping the moon god lately? Or have I been responding to God's call, the true God's call? But from this perspective, the life of faith, the one demonstrated by Abram here, it's not about moralism or legalism. It's not about rules. There aren't any yet. Instead, the life of faith is fundamentally about turning away from those false gods and instead entering into and enjoying a relationship with our God. And in this respect, Abram is the quintessential model for our traditions. That's why we point back to him. That in a time and culture where polytheism was rampant, he was the one man who heard God's call and turned away and walked in faith. And remarkably, he was not young. He was 75 years old. He was fully settled into this culture and this community in Haran, with a household, his own history, his family traditions, and no particular way or reason to upend his life. And yet, when that word came, when that calling came, and God said, "Go, leave your country, leave your people, leave your father's household," even though he was not provided with a map or an itinerary, there's no explanation of how he's going to make it another 1,000 miles. All he's given is just a direction. Go that way, into the land I will show you. And of course, there's a promise attached to it, a pretty important one. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. But still, it's remarkable. Verse 4 there in this brief passage tells us a lot, because it tells us that Abram didn't complain and he didn't ask questions. He didn't wait. When he heard the call, he simply went. And that's a pretty good description of faith. It's not necessarily a feeling, and certainly not certainty. Faith is not the absence of fear or doubt. Rather, faith is found in the going, in the responding, in the doing. Faith is that movement of a life that is chosen to respond to the call, even not fully understanding it, even not being sure where it's going to take us. We've heard the call, and we simply go. But importantly, God's promise here to Abram, even though perhaps it sweetened the deal, but importantly, this promise doesn't end with Abram. God doesn't say here, "I will bless you," and that's the end. The blessing has a trajectory. It has an extension to it. It continues. All people on earth will be blessed through you, it says. Abraham is not chosen so that he himself can be spiritually comfortable, religiously set apart, privately favored. In many ways, it's not even about him at all. He was chosen so that through him, the blessing could flow outward to his children, to strangers, to nations, to those yet unborn, to us sitting here this morning. We are living in the result of Abram not keeping the blessing to himself, but instead becoming a participant in spreading God's grace, God's blessing throughout the world. And I think that's true of all calling. Divine call is always bigger than the one who receives it. In fact, I could be wrong, but it may be the case that we're not even able to hear the call at all if we're solely preoccupied with ourselves at the expense of others. It's its own form of idolatrous sin, all its own, the worship of this. Have you been worshiping the moon god lately? Paul understood this. we heard from his letter to the Romans. And writing centuries later, he holds up Abraham as the great example of what true faith really looks like, what it really is, and crucially, what it's not. It is not the result of religious performance. Abraham was not justified because he kept the law. The law hadn't even been given yet, and that wouldn't happen for quite a long time. Abraham was not justified because he was circumcised. That also hadn't happened yet. Instead, he was justified because he simply trusted in this God who calls. He believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, which is to say, in our Wesleyan Methodist vernacular, that grace came first. Grace came first. The call came first. In our soteriology, our theology of salvation, the way that we Methodists describe this is the activity, the action of prevenient grace. It literally means the grace that came before, sometimes called preventing grace. There's a description, a rather famous and popular description, a metaphor that's used to describe salvation in the Methodist tradition, and it goes like this. We're at a high school dance with God. We didn't come together. We humans are on one side of the room. We're hesitant, we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're still kind of awkward teenagers. And God's over there on the other side. And in other traditions, there's the idea, they present the idea in the structure of this metaphor, that we humans are the ones who go over and approach God and say, would you like to dance? But in our tradition, grace comes first. God's call comes first. And so on that dance floor, it is not us who makes the first move. It is God who comes all the way. We don't even meet halfway in the middle. God comes all the way over to our side of the dance floor, reaches down and says, I would really love to dance with you. That's the call. And it simply requires us to do what Abram did. Is just say yes. To respond. To respond to that grace that comes before, that grace that comes first before we've made any intellectual decision, before we've had a confirmation class, before we know all the books of the Bible and all the complications and all the rules and all the polity and all the book of discipline and all that stuff that I love. But in the beginning, all it takes is to say yes. And that's what communion is really about. It is the present experience of all these great covenants from the past. The covenant with Noah, the covenant with Abraham, the covenant with Moses, and of course, the covenant with Jesus Christ. But it's also the foretaste of the fulfillment of the promises that are yet to come. That all nations and all peoples will be blessed. You'll hear that. If you listen to the communion liturgy, you will hear all these moments, critical covenantal moments recited. And then also the promises that are yet to come, and it concludes, it rises, one of the most powerful moments in that liturgy. is when we pray that these elements would become the body and blood of Christ, so that we might become the body and blood of Christ for the world. It's the same echo of that blessing so that we might become a blessing. We receive God's Abrahamic blessing, not just so we can sit around and enjoy it ourselves, but so that we can become participants and go out and carry that blessing out into the world. That's what communion is. It's an act of faith in this promise that God's grace is present and available to us all. It's not dependent on our personal righteousness. When we come forward and we receive these elements, we're not settling a debt. We're not checking a box. We're certainly not walking across the dance floor to... No. God has done all the work already. We're certainly not demonstrating that we've been good enough this week to deserve a place at the table. We're doing exactly what Abram did. We are trusting in promises we cannot fully prove, and we're stepping forward in faith. We are simply saying, yes. So the promise this morning, the promise we respond to, is that in the breaking of bread and the sharing of the cup, Christ is truly present. That his broken body and shed blood have done something that the law could never do. That we have been made right with God, not through our effort, but through this grace that is received solely by faith. But again, that promise is not meant for us alone. This table doesn't exist just so that we can be spiritually refueled for our own private benefit. Fundamentally, we are fed so that we can go forth and feed others. And it's not abstract. It means that when you and I walk out of here today, we carry this with us. The grace that you experience and receive at this table, unearned, freely given, which is rooted in that same promise that sent an old man walking towards a land he couldn't see. It's that grace that is meant to move through us and be carried out into the world, into your home, into your workplace, into your neighborhood, into the lives of people who have never heard that there is a table set for them, that there is a place here that they're welcome to have. That's what it means for us to be called and blessed. Now, in the United Methodist Church, we worship at an open table. That means you don't have to be a member of this church or any church in order to participate. That's the whole point of this prevenient grace thing. I don't determine who God is calling. I don't determine who is eligible to receive. We don't determine who is righteous enough, who is ready. God does. God does all the work. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with Pastor Bill. And we were discussing altar calls. An evangelistic tradition that some of you folks would be uncomfortable with, but some of you would really like to have. But I said to Pastor Bill, I'm not sure I've got it in me to do an altar call. And he said, Wren, you do an altar call every month. I said, what do you mean? Communion. an altar call. So whether you've been a Christian your whole life, whether you've been a member of this church for 1 year or 50 years, this is your monthly opportunity to accept Jesus Christ into your heart, to acknowledge him as Lord and Savior, to respond to the call, participate in this sacrament, and say, yes, I will journey with you. I will dance with you. I will go. So may you experience this sacrament afresh this morning. May you remember the life of Abram. And may you say yes.